I was the richest man in town, but all the money in the world couldn't buy her love. Not hers, not mine. There are things we only understand too late, when our hearts are already broken inside and silence becomes a dull scream inside our chest. I remember the day she passed me by as if I were a shadow leaning against the doorframe. I was there, with a cold coffee in my hand, waiting for a good morning. Any old phrase, even a lie, would have sufficed. But she just passed by. The perfume she wore was the same as when she first charmed me. Only that day, the scent didn't embrace me, it pushed me away. It was at that moment that I knew I had already lost her. And it wasn't to another businessman, nor to a childhood friend. It was to the gardener, the same man I paid with a minimum wage and a plate of food, the same one I taught to drive, the same one who said he admired me. He dug the flower beds while she buried my heart. I pretended I didn't see, that I didn't feel. I hid behind the numbers, the meetings, the business trips I invented just so I wouldn't hear her laughter coming from the backyard anymore. I bought an entire house so she could live like a queen, and she chose to sleep with the man who watered the plants. Sometimes we only start dying when we stop telling the truth. I almost didn't have the courage to tell this. I kept it to myself for so many years that I thought I would die without opening my mouth. But today, I just wanted someone to listen for real, because this pain here still weighs, and what comes next, maybe it will be even worse. So, show that I'm not talking alone. Leave your like, and stay with me until the end. Subscribe, because there are still things I've never told anyone. My name is Vicente. Today I am 84 years old. For 40 years, I was the richest man in this city, but I was the poorest in love. I don't even know if they still remember my name. Maybe the older ones, those who still walk slowly along the potholed sidewalks where it all began. Maybe they're children who heard my deeds like legends told at silent dinners. Mr. Vicente, the owner of the lumber yard, they would say, the man who built 3 entire neighborhoods with his own hands. Yes, it's true, I built a lot, houses, streets, schools, but there are some things that no man can put back together. His own heart after it falls. I was born right here, a small town where everyone knows who is whose son, where gossip travels faster than an ambulance. My father was a bricklayer. My mother washed clothes for others. I grew up with the smell of thick soap on my hands and calluses on my feet. I learned early on that the world had no room for poor dreamers. You either worked your butt off or became just another forgotten person in the grocery line. I worked my butt off. Life shaped me like a hammer. I was never the smartest, but I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. When I went bankrupt at the lumberyard buying what no one wanted, they laughed at me. When the first truck left loaded with logs, they called me crazy. When I built the new warehouse, they started calling me Dr. Vicente. And that's when I started to disappear inside. Fame comes like a light breeze at first. People look at you differently, greet you with respect disguised as envy. Banks offer you coffee, and mayors invite you to meetings. Girls smile, men flatter you. And you, fool, think you finally won. But no one tells you that winning alone is just a pretty name for loneliness. I had money, he had properties, cars he didn't even drive, a place with a pool that I never went into, and a house too big to fit just the echo. The walls were white, clean, but cold, like her. Like the woman I swore to love and protected with more strength than any investment I'd ever made in my life. Anna was beautiful, still is, I imagine. Her brown hair flowed down her back as if the wind followed her wherever she went. But her eyes were never mine. Not when he called me my love in front of others, not when he lay next to me at night and sighed as if he carried a sadness that I couldn't cure. I tried. God, how I tried. I bought her jewelry, clothes, gave her everything the world called love in the form of gifts. I went on trips, renovated the house 3 times, changed the furniture just because she said she wanted something brighter. But she remained dark inside, silent, distant, and I I pretended. Not to see, because to admit it would be to lose everything, and I had already lost so much. In the city, they treated me like a king, but at home, I was just a tired old man who smelled of sawdust. Sometimes, I would come home from work early just to see if she would notice. I would sit at the table and wait for a look, a smile, some gesture, but she would just sit there, cutting vegetables as if I were invisible. And the worst part is that I got used to it, to the silence, to the coldness, to the emptiness, like water dripping on stone day after day, until it pierced through. It didn't hurt all at once. It was slow, unbearably slow. There were days when I would walk around the house just to hear my own footsteps. The lumberyard was noisy, full of life, the shouts of workers, the smell of cut wood, but at home, it was just the sound of my breathing and the muffled noises of the television, where she laughed at things I didn't understand. And I wondered, who could it be that she shared those laughs with when I wasn't around? I don't know what's worse, finding out you're not loved or pretending you don't understand, because we lie to ourselves more than we lie to anyone else. I told her she was just tired, that it was stress, that everything would get better in time. But inside me a part screamed, an old but alive part that still remembered what it was like to be looked at truthfully. And she didn't look at me like that. She never did. I remember a Saturday afternoon. The sky was cloudy, the wood of the porch creaking in the wind. I was sitting in the armchair, the leather one I had custom made. Anna was in the garden, kneeling, tending to the rose bushes, and he was by her side. The gardener, Pedro, young, strong, without the tiredness on his shoulders that I carried. She laughed at something he said, a short but lively laugh. I hadn't heard that laugh in years. It wasn't for me. At that moment, I swear by all that is sacred, the world went silent. There was only that scene before me, her touching his arm, as if she had forgotten she had a husband. He was laughing, blushing, a little embarrassed, but not pulling away. And there I was, with my hands folded in my lap, squeezing my fingers together until it hurt. I didn't do anything. I didn't even cough. I didn't even get up. I just stood there, watching, my insides hurting, feeling the taste of iron in my mouth, as if I had bitten my own heart. The truth is that afternoon I discovered that it wasn't just her who didn't love me. I didn't love myself anymore either. I felt old, worn out, forgotten, and worse, powerless. Because what I wanted most was to scream, confront, ask, is he the one you love? But all I could do was get up slowly, walk to the back of the house, and close the door to my office. Inside, I cried, quietly, with shame. Because men don't cry, right? Especially a man like me who built everything from nothing. But at that moment, I was just a pile of dust inside wrinkled skin. I spent that night awake. I looked at Anna sleeping so peacefully, so far from me, even right next to me. The room was cold, but I was sweating. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smiling at him. Not with me, never with me. And for the first time in decades, I was afraid. Afraid of living with a woman who was only there for convenience. Afraid of being the kind of husband she could only stand. Afraid of having become a rich shadow that she avoided facing, and worst of all, afraid that everyone would know except me. It's strange. You spend your whole life being admired, respected, feared, but deep down, what you want most is to be loved. That's all. True affection, a hand that squeezes yours with desire, a look that says, I see you. I didn't have that anymore, and I didn't even know when I lost it. Maybe I never had it. I met Anna when she was young, before everything, before the lumberyard, before the respected name, before I learned to hide sadness behind a tight smile. I was just a boy with feet stiff from working so much, hands full of calluses, and a silly dream in my chest. And she was the most beautiful thing my eyes had ever seen. I remember the first time I saw her as if it were yesterday. I was at the market in the central square, selling the little wooden things I made in my spare time, hoe handles, rustic benches, simple things. She was walking down the street wearing a light blue dress, her hair tied in a loose bun, and a book clutched to her chest. It seemed like she was walking slowly, just to give herself time to be noticed. And she was. My world stopped there. Each step she took was louder than the buzz of the market vendors, louder than the sound of the chainsaw that I heard every day in the warehouse. There was something in her eyes, a mix of sweetness and distance, like someone looking at you, and at the same time seeming to look beyond. That captivated me. At that time, I didn't even have the courage to get close to her. I spent days practicing how to start a conversation. I made up excuses to walk down her street. I waited for her to get out of school. Yes, she was still studying, just to watch her cross the bridge. It was an obsession that I called love. And maybe it really was, because I never wanted anyone else the way I wanted Anna. When I finally got the courage to talk to her, my hands were sweating so much that I slipped the bag of apples I had brought as a gift. She laughed. That laugh. It was the first time I felt truly alive, and in that moment, without knowing it, I gave my entire soul. She was beautiful, not in an obvious way, but in a way that made you forget where you came from. She had a soft voice, delicate gestures. That way she would play with her hair when she felt embarrassed. And when she smiled, my entire body filled with a warmth that not even the midday sun could give. I began to live for that smile. We dated for a short time. She said she wanted to live soon, get married, have a house, stability. And I, who wanted to give her the world, did what I could. I worked twice as hard. I slept little. I accepted jobs that no one else wanted, just to buy the ring, just to build the foundations of what I thought would be our happiness. And when I succeeded, when I put that cheap ring on her finger, I felt like I was the richest man on earth. We got married in a little white chapel, with flowers that her mother planted in the backyard. She wore a simple dress, but to my eyes she looked like royalty. That night, as she slept next to me for the first time, I made a promise to never let her lack anything, and I kept it. At least, what money can buy. Over time, I grew up. The small sawmill became a lumberyard. Contracts, trucks, politics, and looks came along. And everything I did with her in mind. Every brick, every wall, every penny I saved was for Anna. Did she like fine clothes? I bought them. Did she dream of a garden? I hired gardeners. Did she want to travel? I invented deals just to take her. When she said, "I like that," I bought two. When she was silent, I guessed what she wanted, or tried, and she smiled. At first, she hugged me when she came back from her trips, wrote notes in delicate handwriting, left little notes with the scent of her perfume on my shirts. I kept them all. To this day, I have a little box with 3 of them. The last one is from many years ago, and it just says, "I'll be back soon. Love, Anna." She came back, but she was never the same. Over time, the sparkle in her eyes began to fade. Like a candle that had burned for too long, the flame wavered, tired, and I pretended not to see it. I wanted so much to believe that she was still that girl from the fair, that I didn't realize when she stopped being that. But how could I realize it if I idolized her so much that I only saw what I wanted to? The truth, which I still have trouble accepting today, is that she never loved me the way I loved her. Maybe she liked me. Maybe she loved the security, the promising future. Maybe she confused gratitude with passion. And I turned all that into an altar. Anna was my religion, my breath, my purpose. I looked at her as if I had found salvation. She was my point of peace in the midst of chaos, the face I looked for when things went wrong. And even when she became silent, even when she hadn't touched me for weeks, even when her eyes were already looking over my shoulder, I still saw in her the beginning of everything, the girl from the square, the blue dress, the light laugh, the promise of a love that perhaps never existed, at least not in the way I imagined. There were days when I would come home tired, my shoulders aching, my eyes burning from the sawmill dust, and all I wanted was a "How was your day?" But she would just roll over on the couch and say good night without looking at me. And yet, I still thought she was everything. Everything I needed. Everything that was worth it. Today, looking back, I wonder if I was blind or just a coward, maybe both. But at that time, loving too much seemed like the only way to exist. I made her my home, my horizon, my motivation. She was my Anna, my everything. And for that very reason, it was so easy to lose myself completely inside her. She never liked to walk with me in public. She said she was shy, that she didn't feel comfortable with people looking at her, that she preferred discretion. And I, foolish and in love, believed her. I defended her. I justified it even to others. It's just her way, I said. Anna is reserved, delicate. But today I know. It wasn't shyness. It was embarrassment. Shame on me. Shame on the old man with calloused hands who never learned how to match his jacket with his shoes. Shame on the man who sweated too much, who spoke loudly at the fairs, who had the accent of someone who came from the countryside. I could see it in her eyes, in the smiles she held when I told a joke, in the way she let go of my hand as soon as the street got more crowded, in the invitations she declined to social events, always with the same excuse: headache, tiredness, feeling unwell. But all it took was a friend calling, and she would get ready in minutes. I started noticing these things little by little, like tiny cracks in a beautiful wall. You don't see them right away, but they're there, slowly growing, tearing from the inside. The first Christmas she didn't want to take a picture with me. "I look ugly," she said. But she walked away, smiling with her cousin minutes later. The first birthday I spent alone because she needed to visit her mother. But then I found out she was at a new restaurant with some friends I'd never met. Her clothes started to change, her looks too. One day, I walked into the room and saw her looking at herself in the mirror, trying on a new dress. When she saw me, she pretended not to be. She said it wasn't for me, that she was just curious, but the sparkle in her eyes, I knew that one. It hadn't been for me for a long time. I remember one night at a charity gala dinner for the city government. They invited me to be honored. The whole city was going. I invited Anna. She declined. She said she didn't like events like that she didn't know what to wear, that she would feel out of place. I went alone. I stood there among businessmen, councilmen, well-dressed ladies with very strong perfume. I felt like a lost boy among giants, and all I wanted was for her to be by my side, not because of the others, but because on that stage, at that moment, I just needed to look at her and see that in the end it all made sense. But she didn't go. When I got home, I found the living room dark, the TV on low, and Anna lying on the couch, her eyes closed. She didn't even ask how it was. She didn't even pretend to be interested. I sat next to her and watched her. Her face was calm. Her hair was messy. Her breathing was slow, and a question like a barb stuck in my throat. "Why don't you love me like you used to?" But I didn't say anything, because back then, men didn't ask that kind of thing. They just kept it in. They swallowed it. They suffered in silence. And her silence became more and more deafening. I started to notice that she was going out more. She would say she was going to the salon, but she would come back smelling of wine. She would say she was going to visit a friend, but I would call and no one would answer. Her excuses were ready-made, as if they had been rehearsed days before, and I, like a coward, pretended to believe her, because it was easier to live a beautiful lie than to face the harsh truth. There was one Sunday. She always liked to spend Sundays in the garden, taking care of the plants. But that Sunday, she spent the whole afternoon locked in her room. She only came out at the end of the day, too dressed for a simple walk. She said she was going to the bakery. She came back 2 hours later without any bread. That night she slept on her back, as she had done for a long time, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each heartbeat, trying to remember when everything started to change, when I stopped being the man in her eyes, and why I kept clinging to an illusion that had long since disappeared. The worst part wasn't what she did. It was what I pretended not to see, what I allowed. The contempt, disguised as distraction, the coldness served with dinner, the empty gazes that avoided mine. It was all there in front of me, but I chose silence. Because deep down I thought that if I didn't speak, maybe it would all disappear. But it didn't disappear. It grew. It spread like mold on the walls of the marriage, and I, the richest man in town, slept every night next to a stranger who no longer wanted to be mine. And yet I called her my love. Pedro was always quiet, but her eyes spoke for him. And I learned to listen to what was not said, to feel what could not be proven, because betrayal sometimes does not need to be touched. It lives in the silence, in the way of looking away, in the laughter that comes at the wrong time. Pedro came to me on the recommendation of a neighbor. He had come from the countryside, looking for a steady job, and someone said I needed a gardener. At the time, the land around the house was too big for Anna to take care of alone, and she was already complaining that the rose bushes were dying. I hired him that same day. He was young, strong, the kind of man who carries bags of soil on his shoulders as if they were bags of bread. And most importantly, he was discreet. He lowered his eyes when he spoke to me. He answered with, "Yes, sir," hard-working, quiet. At first I didn't even notice. He spent his days out back, tending to the flower beds, pruning the trees, watering what Anna called her dream garden. She started spending more time. There too. She said she liked watching the work, understanding the plants, learning how to take care of them herself. I thought it was beautiful. I thought she had finally found some peace. That contact with the earth might calm that restless soul. But it was there, in that corner of the house, that I began to see what I didn't want to see. It was subtle. A muffled laugh coming from the backyard when I arrived early. A hurried "oops!" as if caught by surprise. A broken vase that no one could explain. She went to the market every time I asked where Anna was, and later I discovered that she had left well before the time the gardener said. And her eyes, before distant, cold, they began to shine when they talked about the plants, or rather when they talked about Pedro. "Pedro knows jasmines like no one else," she said. "Pedro said it's good to talk to flowers. Pedro this, Pedro that, Pedro here." And there I was, silent, feeling a bitter taste rise in my throat every time his name escaped her mouth so lightly. One day, I came home from work earlier than usual. I had forgotten a folder of documents. I went into the house and didn't see Anna. The back gate was ajar. I followed the sound of low voices to the garden, and there they were. She was kneeling beside the daisies. He was standing, leaning on the hoe. She was laughing. So was he. But what really hurt was seeing the look in his eyes. It wasn't the look of an employee. It was an intimate look, like someone who already knows the smell of the back of her neck, like someone who has heard the secrets whispered in the dark. And the worst part, she was laughing back. There was no kiss, there was no touching, but there was everything. The tension between them was almost an invisible fabric, stretched between their bodies. When they saw me, she stood up quickly. She said she was helping with the flowers. He lowered his head, excused himself, and left. I just nodded with an empty smile. I went back inside the house and went straight to my office. I locked the door. I stayed there, sitting, with my hands on my knees and my chest aching, because the betrayal that day became visible, even without any proof. I started to pay more attention. I started to write down Pedro's schedule. He always arrived at the same time, but sometimes he left later than he should have. One day, Anna suddenly got a headache and locked herself in her room. I went out, walked around the porch, and saw the garden light. Still on. He was there, watering. Alone? Maybe. But I felt that there was more to it, that there was her smell in that wet earth. And yet, I didn't fire him, because it was easier to suffer in silence than to name the pain, because I still had hope that I was wrong, because the fear of hearing the truth from her mouth was greater than the fear of living with the lie. And the cruelest thing is that Pedro never disrespected me. He treated me with the same calm tone, the same low gaze, but his silence, that silence hurt me more than any shout. It was as if he were saying, "You know, but you're not going to do anything." One day, I left a tool in the garden just so I could have a reason to come back unexpectedly. I pretended to have forgotten a pair of pliers. When I arrived, I found them both silent. She was holding a rose. He was wiping his hands on his apron. They looked at me as if they were pretending to be surprised. "Oh, you're back already," she said, as if I were a nuisance. And I, with a hoarse voice from swallowing so much grief, just smiled and replied, "I forgot something, but I found it now." I left with the certainty that I had lost more than trust. I had lost her. And the worst part, I knew she would still sleep in the same bed, make the same coffee, say the same "it's okay" things. But she wasn't. Nothing was. It was just that no one was talking. And then silence began to live between the three of us. Do you think a man should wait to be caught red-handed? Or accept that the eyes always tell the truth before the mouth? It was in my own house, my living room, my chair, the place where I sat every late afternoon, with the newspaper still folded, the lukewarm coffee beside me, and the illusion that my life was still mine. I can't really explain what made me come back early that day. Maybe it was a slight malaise. Maybe it was just the tiredness of trying to appear strong where there was no strength left. The fact is that I came back. I entered through the front door, as I always did, with the key that I installed myself years ago. The house was strangely quiet. Not a sound from the television, not the sound of dishes in the kitchen, not Anna's light footsteps in the hallway. I called once. Nothing. That was when I noticed the door to the living room was half open, and I heard the muffled laughter of a woman who hadn't laughed with me in a long time. My body froze. That laughter, light, intimate, free, was hers. Anna. But there was something different there, a freedom she hadn't used with me in years. The kind of laughter that you can't force, that only escapes when you're where you want to be. I approached slowly, not out of courage, but out of instinct, like a wounded animal smelling its own death. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought they would hear it. I placed my hand against the wood of the door. It was cold. Sweat was trickling down my back, and then I pushed. Slowly. Evie, Anna, was sitting on my sofa. Her back was to me. Her head was thrown back, laughing, her hair loose like it hadn't been for a long time. Her legs were crossed, barefoot. Her body had a lightness I hadn't seen since my youth. And next to her, on the arm of the chair where I used to sit, was Pedro, shirtless. His hand was resting on her leg. The touch was natural. There was no tension, no rush, just intimacy, old-fashioned intimacy, the cruelest of all. They didn't see me at the time, or they pretended not to see me. My whole body froze. I wanted to scream, break something, make the world stop, but I stood there, still, like a shadow of what I once was, watching the scene that was tearing out everything I had left inside. Then she touched his face, tenderly, like she never did to me again, like he was her safe haven, which I thought he was. It was at that moment that Pedro saw me, and he stopped. He was speechless. Anna, noticing the silence, turned her face. Her eyes met mine, and there was no guilt there, no fear. There was just a strange relief, like someone who has finally been caught because they got tired of hiding. She didn't say anything. She didn't even get up. He just stared at me, with a mixture of pity and tiredness. And that was worse than any slap, worse than any insult, because she didn't try to explain herself, or justify herself, or apologize. She just accepted the end, like someone who knew it had been written a long time ago. "What is this?" I managed to say, my voice sounding more like a broken whisper. Pedro stood up. He grabbed his shirt. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. I didn't take my eyes off her. I expected a reaction, anything, a cry, a plea, an attack. But she just looked down and said, "I'm tired of pretending, Vicente." Ready. That was the sentence. Nothing more. No tears. No explanation. No, "I'm sorry." Just that. I'm tired of pretending. What I saw there, in that room, in that chair where I sat so many times thinking I was the master of my house, my destiny, her love, destroyed the man I was, took me out of my body, turned me inside out, reduced me to nothing. I walked back to the street without remembering how I had walked. My legs felt like they were made of wax. The air outside was as heavy as lead. I remember standing on the sidewalk, hands in my pockets, trying to understand who I was now, because until then, I had been the husband, the provider, the respected man. Now I was just a betrayed old man, forgotten within his own story. I spent hours wandering around the city aimlessly. Every corner reminded me of her, every store I helped open, every tree I planted, the square where I asked her to be my girlfriend, the church where we got married. Everything was now a stage for a lie that was too long. That night I didn't go home, and surprisingly, she didn't care. I pretended I didn't see. I kept smiling at dinner. She lay with me, and I slept with the pain. It was the most cowardly choice I ever made, and at the same time the bravest. Cowardly because I knew every gesture, every absence. I knew that her eyes were no longer mine. Brave because enduring what I endured without saying a word requires more strength than any fight, any scandal. After that day, the day of the living room, the chair, her laughing with another man, I said nothing. I didn't yell, I didn't ask, I didn't pack my bags. I came back the next morning as if nothing had happened. She was already in the kitchen, making coffee, with the same neutral expression of someone who was just following the script. She looked at me, said, "Good morning," and I responded with the strongest voice I could muster. I sat down at the table. I picked up the bread. I chewed it with anger and disgust, but I swallowed it, all of it. I swallowed the taste of dirt in my mouth, the bile that rose along with the memory, the image of her laughing as he touched her. I swallowed the pain with the bitter coffee, and I began to rehearse the character I would play for the next few months, the man who pretends he doesn't know. At company meetings, no one suspected anything. At lunch with friends, I told jokes. At my niece's birthday party, I took a picture with her. Anna, the perfect wife, who smiled with the same mouth that whispered, "I'm tired of pretending." The nights were the worst part. She lay on the left side of the bed, as always. She wore the same blue pajamas that I had once bought her thinking they matched. Her eyes, but now that blue made me nauseous because it wasn't mine anymore, because I knew she wore it out of habit, not for me. Sometimes her arm would brush against mine, and I would hold my breath, as if that touch burned. And it did, not from heat, from humiliation. She fell asleep quickly. She turned over on her back, and that was where my hell began. I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to her breathing, as if listening to a trial. I thought about everything I had done, everything I had given, every brick in that house, every plant in the garden, every sacrifice, everything thrown in the trash by a gardener with firm hands and silent eyes. But I never confronted her. And do you know why? Pride. Pure pride. Because I didn't want her to see how much it hurt. I didn't want to give her the victory of my despair. I preferred to burn inside, but keep up the facade. The strong, serene Seu Vicente, who doesn't get shaken. The city continued to call me an example. The employees still took off their hats when they saw me pass by, and she continued to pretend too. It was a theater, A cold theatre, without an audience, where everyone already knew the text by heart. Sometimes I would watch her gestures at the table, the way she spread butter on her bread, the way she stirred the sugar in her coffee, and I would look for any shadow of that girl from the market in her. But there was nothing left. She had been gone for a long time. Only her body remained. The rest lived in the backyard. On Sunday we went to Mass. I wore my starched clothes. She wore a light dress and a clean expression. We sat together in the front pew. People looked at us with respect. A model couple, an exemplary couple. And I prayed. Not for forgiveness, but for strength. Strength to keep pretending. One night, I woke up sweating. I had dreamed of our wedding day. She in white, I in that rented suit. I remembered the promise I had made at the altar. In sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow. I felt ashamed, not for breaking my vow, but for still trying to fulfill it with someone who had already broken everything. I started going out more. I invented meetings, technical visits, trips. I slept at the farm. I took with me a small suitcase, a random book, and a heart too patched up to bear another night with my back turned. I never spoke to Pedro again. He understood. He disappeared without warning. Maybe Anna sent him away. Maybe he himself decided it wasn't worth it anymore. But his absence didn't bring any relief. It only made the emptiness he had revealed even clearer. I became a ghost inside my house, someone who prowls the hallways, who sits at the table, who lies in bed, but no longer lives there. And she knew it too, but none of us had the courage to face the death of what we once were. Silence became a pact, and that pact cost me my soul. Tell me, have you ever slept next to someone who no longer loves you and still preferred silence? But then when I made the big decision, I closed all the companies, I sold everything, and I disappeared without saying goodbye. It was a random Tuesday. The sky was grey, just like the last few months of my life. There was no spark, no fight, no new discovery. It was exhaustion, the exhaustion of silence, the weight of existing in a place where I was just a functional presence, a name on the deed, a taxman, a figure in the corner of the room. I hadn't spoken to Anna for days. We didn't fight. We didn't argue. It was worse. We lived together, like two polite strangers sharing a roof out of obligation, each in their own corner, each with their absences. I was breathing with difficulty, not because of illness, but because I couldn't fit inside myself anymore. I got up early, as usual. I drank my coffee in silence, sitting on the edge of the chair that had so often served as a stage for my pride. She walked past me, took her cup, and left, without saying a word. Not even a good morning. Not even a look. It was at that moment that I decided. It wasn't anger, it wasn't impulse, it was liberation. I finished my coffee. I went to the office. I called the accountant and asked him to organize the sale of the last properties. Land, lumberyard, trucks, even commercial leases. I said I didn't want anything else. Just what was necessary to disappear. No one understood. They called me crazy. Mr. Vicente, you have assets for 3 lives. But what's the point of having so much if none of those lives are yours? I didn't want any more buildings. I didn't want to see my name painted on signs of stores I didn't even know existed. I wanted peace. And at that moment, peace only lived far from everything. I hung up the phone. I went down to the lumberyard one last time. I walked slowly among the idle machinery, the still warm benches of workers. The smell of damp wood brought back the boy I once was, the one who dreamed of being someone. And in a way, I was. But somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was building all this for. I walked through the main office. I touched the walls. I looked at the photos hanging there. Me and Anna when we were young. Me and Anna at the inauguration of the second warehouse. Me and Anna at our 25th wedding anniversary party. I smiled, a crooked, bitter smile. Then I tore each one off the wall. Not out of anger, but because we were no longer the ones in the photo. Maybe we never were. I arrived home late in the afternoon. She was in the garden, sitting on the iron chair, reading, as if everything was normal, as if there wasn't a gap between us. I didn't say anything. I went inside. I went to the bedroom. I opened the closet. I took out a small bag. I put in a few clothes, an old book, and a photo of my mother, the only one who still looked at me with tenderness. In the bedroom mirror, I stared at myself for a minute too long. I saw a man hunched over, tired, but with something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Determination. In the kitchen, I left a sheet of paper on the table. It wasn't a letter, just a note with 3 words. You can keep everything. I walked out the front door. I walked slowly down the sidewalk. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if she was at the window. I didn't want to see if she read the note. I needed that ending to be mine. No audience, no goodbye, no drama. I got in the car, started the engine and drove, with no specific destination in mind. All he knew was that he no longer wanted to be remembered as the betrayed man, the lonely old rich man. He wanted to be just Vicente, a simple man, a free man. I was away for months. I rented a room in a forgotten inn in the countryside with the smell of burnt coffee and scratchy sheets. For the first time in decades, no one knew me, no one expected anything from me. And that was a relief I didn't know existed. I spent my days reading, walking around the square, listening to other people's conversations on the wooden bench. The fee nights were long. The silence still hurt, but it was my own silence, chosen, different from the one that had swallowed me for so long. I didn't call. I didn't send a letter. I didn't ask for news. I didn't want to know who was left, what they said if they missed me, because I understood that sometimes the greatest justice is not to shout. It's to disappear. It's to leave the other person talking to themselves in the room they destroyed. It's to be missed, not to make noise. Years later, I found out that she ended up being abandoned by that same gardener. Life has a silent way of giving us things back. Not at the speed we want, not in the way we imagine, but it gives us things back. And when it does, it doesn't do so with a shout. It does so with an echo. I had been missing for a long time. I no longer answered calls. I no longer replied to letters. I reinvented myself in the silence of a forgotten city where no one knew my name and no one looked at me with that weight of Seu Vicente the Great. I was just the old man on the bench in the square, the man in room 7 at the inn on the corner, and that for me was more than enough. But the past has a way of finding us. One day on a cold morning, while I was having coffee in a modest bakery, I saw a familiar face come in. He wasn't from the city. An old employee of mine, one of those who owed me favors and respect, but whom life had scattered around the world. He recognized me from afar. He turned pale. He approached with that embarrassed look of someone who thinks he's seeing a ghost. "Mr. Vicente, is that really you?" I nodded with a slight smile. The kind of smile that only old age brings. The kind that no longer carries the rush nor the hunger for conversation, just the weight of having survived. We sat down. He talked about a little bit of everything: business, family, politics, illnesses, and at the end, as if holding back the poison until the last sip, he said, "I heard about Anna. Her name pierced me like a forgotten razor in my chest." I remained silent. I just looked. He looked down. He fiddled with his napkin. He sighed. "It's been about 2 years since Pedro disappeared. He took her money, part of the house she sold, and left with a new girl. They said he didn't even say goodbye. She was left alone. She's been living with a cousin who's kind of sick. It seems like she doesn't leave the house anymore. Almost no one visits." I didn't say anything. Not a word. I just stared at the empty coffee cup as if some answer lived there. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt justice. Not a vengeful, angry justice, but the kind that comes with time, the kind of justice of consequences, the kind that doesn't need a court, that doesn't require witnesses. She reaped, not because I wished it, but because she sowed. Pedro never wanted her. He wanted what came with her: comfort, money, status. And when she lost all that, when my name was no longer hers, he did what he would always do. He left, simple as that, because no man builds love on the betrayal of another. He only took my place for a while, until he was no longer useful. She lost everything, including herself. And maybe that was the worst part, because the money, the house, the dresses, all of that can be put back together. But dignity, when it breaks, there's no seam in the world that can repair it. I spent days thinking about her, not with hate, not with resentment, but with a kind of resigned pity, because loving someone who later destroys themselves is like watching a beautiful ship sink. You can even save the wreckage, but it will never sail the same way again. Sometimes people ask me if I would have done things differently, if I would have forgiven, if I would have stayed, and I respond with silence. The same silence that consumed me for years, because there are pains that cannot be explained. They can only be survived. And in that coffee shop, on that winter morning, I understood that I was no longer the betrayed one. I was the survivor. He was the man who lost everything. And yet he came out whole, not out of revenge, but because he had chosen to leave before he too became rubble. Today, they say she spends her afternoons looking out the window as if waiting for something that will never come. Maybe she's waiting for me, maybe for Pedro, maybe she's just waiting for time to pass. And that's what hurts the most. Have you ever seen someone destroy themselves trying to hurt someone else and end up hurting only themselves? Life took everything from me, but it gave me something that money never gave. Peace. A peace that cannot be bought with real estate, nor deposited in bank accounts. A peace that does not come from applause, nor from expensive parties, nor from gold rings on the finger of someone who never truly loved you. It comes from silence, from well-chosen solitude, from sleep that arrives without weight on. The soul. It comes from looking in the mirror, and for the first time in years, not looking away. Today I speak, not as a betrayed man, but as a free man. Free from the role they gave me. Free from the mask of the perfect husband, the admired businessman, the husband who smiled on the outside and bled on the inside. I speak as someone who survived his own story, and survived with dignity. I learned that wealth is not what you accumulate, it is what you let go of. That love is not what you build in silence, and that sometimes loving too much is a mistake, because the love that destroys you is not love, it is prison. I carried this pain for years, like a backpack full of rocks. I tried to ignore it, I tried to hide it. I tried to deserve a love that was never given to me, and when I finally let go, when I left everything behind, my name, my possessions, even my pride, I discovered the only truth that matters. There is no greater defeat than continuing where your soul has already left. Today I live with little. A simple room, an old radio, coffee filtered through a cloth, and a rocking chair that creaks when the wind blows. And it is there, in the silence of the afternoon, watching the sky change color, that I understand that I lost everything, only to finally find myself. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, is worth more than the peace of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. Telling this hurt, but hiding it for so long hurt even more. I don't think anyone understands the weight we carry when we choose silence. Pain becomes furniture. You get used to it. You think it's part of your house, your body, your life. And one day, it becomes you. Today, telling this story was like opening a window after years in the dark. You listened to me until the end, and that changes everything for me. It doesn't matter if you were in silence, washing dishes, or lying in bed trying to sleep. What matters is that you stayed. And for that, thank you. Truly. Comment here with the word true if you've ever had to hide something just to stay on your feet. Leave a like, follow the channel. Maybe someone else needs to hear this. And who knows, on the other side of the screen, there's a heart waiting for the same courage to vent too. And if this already hurt you, get ready, because the next story is the cruelest of all. In the video that appears now, there is a painful confession full of twists and turns that will revolt you, move you, and teach you lessons that you will never forget.